Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. For the last 24 hours, I have been thinking about something that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said yesterday. You may have seen he came out to announce that he is not just against the ambitious voting rights bill known as the For the People Act, but also the much more limited John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would simply reestablish provisions of the Voting Rights Act that were struck down by the Supreme Court in 2013.
There's no threat to the voting rights law. It's against the law to discriminate in voting on the basis of race already. And so I think it's unnecessary.
Unnecessary. Already against the law to discriminate on the basis of race. Now, there's a bunch of stuff to unpack here. First, back in 2006, Mitch McConnell not only voted for reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act, but as majority whip, he was responsible for getting his Republican colleagues to vote for it, too. He even took to the Senate floor to give a speech about it.
We have, of course, renewed the Voting Rights Act periodically since that time, overwhelmingly and on a bipartisan basis, year after year after year, because members of Congress realize that this is a piece of legislation that has worked. And one of my favorite sayings that many of us use from time to time is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And this is a good piece of legislation that has served an important purpose over many, many years. This landmark piece of legislation will continue to make a difference, not only in the South, but for all of America and for all of us, whether we're African Americans or not.
15 years ago, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So you got to wonder when Mitch McConnell thinks it broke. For Mitch McConnell to come out yesterday and say, well, you see, it's already illegal to discriminate on the basis of race for voting and not be the source of just universal ridicule and condemnation speaks to just how absent the historical context of race and democracy is in all of our discussions today. McConnell says it's already against the law to discriminate from voting on the basis of race. And so he thinks a law policing that right is unnecessary. Now, there is a very obvious problem here. Those who have studied the history of voting rights in America and the thwarted efforts to achieve a multiracial democracy in this country know it has been against the law to discriminate on the basis of race in voting since 1870, when the 15th Amendment was ratified, saying, quote, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude." It says it right there in black and white in the U.S. Constitution. It says that you cannot racially discriminate in voting. And so you can imagine a version of Mitch McConnell in, 1920 Kentucky saying literally the exact same statement. Oh, well, why would we need a law to enforce voting rights? It's already illegal. Or say avowed segregationist Senator Strom Thurmond in the middle of filibustering the 1957 Civil Rights Act saying, quote, "There are mainly three reasons why I feel the bill should not be passed. The first is that it is unnecessary. Every state has enacted some legislation making it unlawful to intimidate a voter or to hinder him in the exercise of his voting rights. Penalties have been provided for such violations. We don't need new laws to protect the right to vote, certainly not to protect against discrimination or race. Those already exist. It's in the Constitution." Those were the type of arguments segregationists made, Jim Crow authoritarians, decade after decade after decade after decade in this country, as they flogged multiracial democracy to death underneath the table as they gave those speeches. We're not discriminating. The law says we can't. Anyone can vote. This is how Senator James Eastland, a Mississippi notorious segregationist, the voice of the white South, put it to Mike Wallace.
Are you suggesting that your people down in the state of Mississippi encourage Negroes to register and vote?
Well, we have no voting qualifications based on race.
Well, under those circumstances...
We have none at all, and anybody who's qualified can vote.
Mississippi Senator, 1957. We have no voting qualifications based on race. Of course. Why would we? It's in the Constitution. We can't. The Constitution ratified in 1870 when Mississippi was under federal occupation. They're all saying the same thing. Strom Thurmond, James Eastland, and, well, Mitch McConnell, 64 years later. And McConnell says this as he is threatening to filibuster the whole set of legislation meant to affirm the franchise, leading to a situation one critic described as a Senate that has a minority of misguided senators who will use the filibuster to keep the majority of people from even voting. And so even though it has been the law since 1870, as Mitch McConnell says, that did not matter to the vast swaths of millions of ostensibly free black Americans who watched their right to vote, the right to participate and self-govern, enshrined in the U.S. Constitution at the cost of the blood of hundreds of thousands. They watched that destroyed, eroded, and gutted by all kinds of means, extra-legal terrorism in the form of the KKK and lynch mobs, and armed coups that literally took governments away from them, which were multiracial in nature. That happened in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. White people just storming the town hall, taking it over. And which I imagine you probably have not heard a lot about because it's not really taught in schools. In fact, armed coups taking power away from legitimately elected multiracial governments happened all over the South. Then, of course, there were the Jim Crow laws, which very studiously, explicitly avoided mentioning race because, again, the 15th Amendment said you cannot. And that's why we had these faux race-neutral restrictions, things like literacy tests, and grandfather clause, and name how many jelly beans are in the jar. Laws that made it almost impossible functionally for black people to vote, despite the right being enshrined in the 15th Amendment. That is the whole story, the whole struggle for making real the promise of multiracial democracy and universal enfranchisement of all adults. So to come out in 2021 and say, well, the law prescribes it, just shows you know nothing about the history, or are you wildly cynical, or both. You cannot understand the efforts of voter suppression. You can't understand what we are seeing today unless you understand this history, because it was precisely methods of ostensibly race-neutral voter suppression, for instance, changing the hours when the registrar was open or making it only open once a month. Those were the methods used to enforce a successful violent reactionary movement in this country that took what was a nascent multiracial democracy in the years of Reconstruction and turned it back into an apartheid state. I've come to believe that story, the story of that fact, that in the wake of the Civil War, we began to put in place the foundations of multiracial democracy, and it was destroyed by a successful effort of white supremacy, is the most important story about America and the least told. When it is not told, it is in the absence of its telling that someone like Mitch McConnell or Republican legislators in Georgia or Texas or Florida can attempt to get away with their nothing to see here attempt to suppress the vote, targeting black and brown people specifically so they can win elections, as has been the case for over a century. And of course, we see these methods all the way up to the federal government. The same goes for the filibuster. Central tool that McConnell is employing at the federal level to block things like the For the People Act, or now he opposes the Voting Rights Act, right? It may sound like just a weird vestige of history. Oh, there's a 50-vote threshold. That's weird. The history of the filibuster is also inextricably bound up with a history of race and Southern obstruction of black enfranchisement. The person who first figured out what would become the modern filibuster, as Adam Jentelson writes in his great book on the subject, was John Calhoun. John Calhoun, the intellectual father of the Confederacy, the man who once famously said slavery was not a necessarily evil, but, quote, a positive good. And yes, the filibuster was used for lots of different things, lots of places, but one of its core central uses was by Southern white senators to block anti-lynching bills in the 20s and 30s, and bills targeting employment and housing discrimination in the 40s and 50s, and to block civil rights bill after civil rights bill after civil rights bill. Earlier, I read a quote condemning the use of the filibuster to block voting rights. You know who said that? Martin Luther King Jr. Here he is, decrying the filibuster as essentially a tool of white supremacy in 1963.
The tragedy is that we have a Congress with a Senate that has a minority of misguided senators who will use the filibuster to keep the majority of people from even voting. They won't let the majority of senators vote. And certainly they wouldn't want the majority of people to vote because they know they do not represent the majority of the American people.
Wild to hear that, right? Statement is just as true now as it was 58 years ago. Everything old is new again. If you do not have this historical context, it is hard to truly appreciate what we are seeing in front of our faces. But that history is largely not taught in schools. People don't hear about Reconstruction and all that it represented. People don't know that the state of South Carolina had a majority black lower house of state legislature in 1868, that Mississippi had a black senator in 1970. I mean, I heard about it. I was lucky enough to have great teachers. Thank you, Mr. Kagan. But even that, not a ton. And that brings us to the assault on history that Republicans are now pairing with their assault on voting rights. It's a kind of pincer movement, right? So they're digging in the archives for methods of voter suppression and targeted attacks on enfranchisement of black and brown folks, an attempt to roll back multiracial democracy to stop it from becoming real, while also attacking the teaching of the history that would illuminate to people why that effort is so dangerous, why it happened before and why it won last time and why it put us where we are now. And so state after state, Fox News and Republicans, conservatives have whipped up a moral panic about so-called critical race theory. More than 20 states have either introduced legislation to ban critical race theory or banned it altogether. Now, critical race theory is an actual doctrine, academic method started by a bunch of scholars of color in the 70s and 80s. It attempts to question some of the race-neutral assumptions about law and power and how they function, particularly in the U.S. I will tell you, I'm not an expert at it. I've read some of it. Like any school of thought, there are critics in the field and between scholars within the field. I don't think it's the definitive word on race and the law or American history. But it's a very different thing than how the term has been applied by conservative activists. A few months ago, Chris Rufo, one of the conservative activists who's pursuing this moral panic, whipping up, gave the game away, tweeting, quote, "The goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory. We have decodified the term and it will recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans." Just pure cynicism. If you don't like it, then it's critical race theory. That's what he's saying. If you don't like it, if you don't want your white children being taught that, say, white terrorists murdered black people throughout the South in a successful campaign to end the experiment of multiracial democracy and replace it with authoritarian apartheid, well, then that's critical race theory. You see how that works? So now the Republicans are railing about free speech to basically make it impossible or even criminal to teach certain things in schools. But it's all part of the same story, right? They're running back to the old tactics from the past while making it harder at the same time for people to learn the truth about that past. These are two fronts in the same war. It's the oldest battle in this country. Are we going to be a democracy for everyone or not?